The
Sorry.
state can the state can pass laws, but if the courts determine that those laws infringe upon our rights, they can change those laws. And then there's federal and state laws. The Civil Rights Act, that prevents discrimination in public accommodations, going out to eat. It prevents discrimination in the workplace. It prevents discrimination in schools. So these are all the ways that we have our rights. I'm going to start big one, First Amendment. States that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So that's written in Old English, but there's a couple key components to the First Amendment. First, it guarantees freedom of religion. It prevents the government from establishing a national religion or favoring one religion over another. The free exercise clause of the First Amendment also ensures individuals can practice their religion freely without government interference. So the government is not supposed to really get involved in matters of religion. They can't do anything that favors one religion, and they can't do anything that prevents you from practicing your religion generally. And then also with freedom of speech, you have the right to express yourself freely, whether through speech, writing, or other forms of expression. This includes the right to criticize the government, share ideas, and participate in public debates. You also have freedom of the press. So, we don't have a national, government censored media. It's supposed to be a free media that does provide a check on the government. We have the right to protest. Individuals can gather in public spaces to protest, march, hold meetings, demonstrate, as long as it is peaceful. There are some limitations with protesting. You might have to get permits and things like that, but you fundamentally have the right to protest. And you also have the right to petition the government. You can formally request the government listen to your concerns and try to address those concerns. Now, the Fourth Amendment, it says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So with that, the Fourth Amendment, it prevents the government from intruding upon your person, home, business, and property without either a valid search warrant, a valid arrest warrant, or a belief rising to the level of probable cause. So in order for the police to enter your house, they need a warrant, and the warrant needs to be signed by a judge. If the police show up to your house without a warrant, do not let them in. That's always, that's always our advice. That's the advice across the board. If law enforcement has a warrant, they're not going to ask your permission to come into the house. They will tell you, we have a warrant. Here it is. You can demand that they present the warrant to you, ask them to slide it under the door. But if they have the warrant, they can come into your home. Without the warrant, they cannot. And I really want to just emphasize this, if law enforcement comes to your house and they want to come into your home, do not talk with them. Tell them, through the door, I will meet with you, but with my attorney. I will have my attorney call you. Please leave your number and my attorney will call you. When interacting with law enforcement, we have the right to have an attorney present, and it's always important to do so. Law enforcement, law enforcement has a tough job. They do. Now, with that, sometimes they try to cut corners. They try to use little tactics, possibly to trick individuals and things like that. So that's why it's important to always have an attorney present, because you can sometimes get yourself, you think you have nothing to hide, right? I'm a law-abiding citizen, alhamdulillah, like a good Muslim. We have nothing to be afraid of. We're not doing anything wrong. But when you're talking with law enforcement, sometimes they do, like I said, try to trick you, or you don't remember something specific, or you forgot you talked with someone, you don't even know the person's name, but they have a picture of you somewhere in the same group as them, and they'll say, "Oh, why are you lying to us?" And then they can apply pressure to kind of use you how they want to use you. So it's always important to contact an attorney if law enforcement is requesting to talk with you. And it's all right. And I think that's what I hope that, the key takeaway is that that's our right. We don't have to talk with law enforcement without an attorney present. So at all times, it's important for us to exercise that right. The Fourth Amendment, that also applies to, certain laws that were certain laws that are known in the public, like stop and frisk. If you're walking down the street, if the police believe you match a description of somebody, or they think a crime was just in progress, they have certain rights. They can stop and frisk someone on the street. And, in those situations, a woman, should be able to request to be searched by a female officer, not a male officer. With wiretaps and surveillance, also, lots of times, especially with the Patriot Act, and after 9/11, lots of Muslims' phones and internet capable devices were surveilled. Lots of times they needed to get a warrant. Certain situations they didn't need to, but there is a legal process in place where the government has to provide some type of concrete facts or reason that they want to search an individual, and that based on those facts, there's reasonable likelihood that a crime is being committed. So the Fourth Amendment, prevents law enforcement from just searching anything, anytime, at any place. So now those are the key constitutional amendments that really give us our rights, especially the ones that we're talking about here, and especially in the discrimination context. But the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a law that was passed by Congress. Prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, just generally, the laws of the United States do not prohibit someone from being racist. The way the Constitution's written, every individual can be who they want to be. We're supposed to have a lot of freedom. You're allowed to say whatever you want to say for the most part. But that was turning to be a problem, throughout the history of America. It became a problem with governing the country. So Congress passed laws where they can try to regulate discriminatory behavior. And based on the Constitution, Congress can only pass laws for certain situations. But they were able to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 because it covers interstate commerce, which is, business between the states. So with that, they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and with the Equal Employment Opportunity Title VII, it prohibits workplace discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, and gender at work. It also prohibits employers from allowing hostile work environments. So employers cannot use your color, race, religion, national origin, or gender as a decision or as a factor in determining whether they want to hire you, promote you, not hire you. And at the same time, employers have a responsibility to make sure that when you're at work, people aren't harassing you and discriminating against you. In Title II of the Civil Rights Act, you cannot be denied service in any place of business open to the general public. You can't be denied service based off of race, religion, national origin, sex. Generally, someone who owns, a shop They have the right to refuse service to individuals. That's generally the rule, but they cannot do that based off of race, religion, national origin, color. So those are our general rights. Now we're going to talk kind of in a know your rights as a traveler context. These people right here, this is TSA. They conduct safety-related searches for weapons and explosives. You take off your shoes. What can TSA do? They can use metal detectors, including X-ray of your luggage and shoes, a body scanner, or pat down, and they have the right to confiscate the prohibited items. TSA cannot target you for additional screening based off of racial or ethnic profiling. They can't ask you questions without some type of probable cause or related to the situation at hand. They can't start to question you about your personal life, where you spend time, work, worship, what your religion is, things like that. And they can't handcuff or strip search you. Then also with traveling, you encounter these individuals: Customs and Border Protection, CBP. They secure the homeland by preventing illegal entry of people and goods while facilitating legitimate travel and trade. What can Customs and Border Protection do? They can question you on your citizenship. They can ask you the nature of your trip. They can ask you about anything you're bringing back to the United States that you did not have when you left. And they can examine your bag, and they can confiscate your electronic items. I'll touch a little bit more on that, but when you come back into the United States, Customs and Border Protection, they do have the authority to seize your electronic devices. We have, best practices and tips on how to, deal with that encounter. What can't Customs and Border Protection do? Similarly, they cannot just target you and ask questions based off of racial or ethnic profiling. They can't start asking you questions without some type of probable cause. They can't ask you about your personal life, where you spend time, work, worship. They can't take your electronic devices and not give you a receipt. They have to provide an inventory, like a receipt that they confiscated this specific device. So if they ever do, take a device, get that in writing. And they cannot handcuff or strip search you. So this is warning: if you're stopped by law enforcement when in an airport, either arriving or departing, law enforcement agents can detain you briefly if they feel that you are a security risk or that you are doing some specific illegal activity. So these are your rights as a traveler. We want, when you're traveling, to assert your rights. If you are being questioned, if you think being subjected to discriminatory questioning, assert your rights. Ask why you are being subjected to any bad treatment. Something else that's important to do is ask to speak to a supervisor. Sometimes, the higher up in command, usually the more that they listen to the laws and the rules that are in place. So sometimes there are rogue agents, but supervisor should at least be listening to the law. It might not be how we want the supervisor to behave. They still may not be nice, they may not be respectful, but as long as they're adhering to the law is, what we want to make sure. If you feel like you actually were discriminated against, we can make complaints to the specific agencies. We can file a complaint to the Department of Homeland Security. If you are, being discriminated, document anyone who stops you, arrests you, or searches you. Take down their badge number, take down their name, what agency they're a part of. Have as much information as possible as you can. So You do not have to answer personal questions that are not related to travel. So if law enforcement asks you, oh, when I traveled to Egypt, oh, what are you doing in Egypt? Oh, who are you going to visit? Those types of questions, those are questions that you are supposed to, answer. And those are the questions that they can ask you. If, I'd say, oh, I'm going to Egypt, and they're like, oh, who are you going to visit in Egypt? And I'm like, oh, my family, my grandmother. And then next, they say, oh, you know, what school do you practice, or what sect of Islam do you follow? Something like that would be an inappropriate question. It doesn't have to do with my travel. And, the question in of self, seems discriminatory, right? They are using like your religion. So questions like that aren't appropriate. Questions that actually have to do with your travel are appropriate. I think with that too, it's important to note there might be situations where, or there are a lot of situations where, say, you know, individuals in our community who travel to Iraq or Iran, there's a blend of questions that are related to travel and a blend of questions that, become where the questions kind of could move into the area of being discriminatory and asking about specific religious practices. So if you encounter that, please contact CAIR, and we can try to pursue whatever legal avenues we have. If anything's taken, make sure you get an inventory sheet. And like I said, call CAIR. Now, generally, rights with international travel are less than they are here in the United States. So, that's just important to know. Here, if you're arrested for a crime, you can demand an attorney. When you're traveling, we always tell people to demand, say, I want my attorney. DHS doesn't necessarily have to let you speak to your attorney, and they don't have to necessarily interact with your attorney while you're in the process of traveling. If they arrest you, then you have a right to an attorney. But if they're just detaining you or asking questions, you don't have necessarily a right to attorney in that moment. But it never hurts to assert that. Sometimes just throwing that out there and threatening, like, I want to speak with my attorney, or I will be following up with my attorney. Sometimes just saying that can put some of a check on the officers who are doing any questioning. Okay, so then some tips to safeguard and protect yourself with your devices. I had mentioned they can seize electronic devices. So when you're traveling, you come out, they want to ask you some questions. They say, oh, well, here, can you open up, we want to look through your cell phone. Pull out your cell phone, or you have your cell phone in your pocket. Our recommendation is to never open your cell phone. They can take it, but if you open it for them, then they have complete access to whatever it is in that moment. If they take it, they do have to jump through some hurdles in order to access your phone. So minimize the data that you carry on your devices. Back up to the cloud or use a temporary device. There are individuals who have phones just for traveling. They don't have their social media. They don't have their WhatsApp. They just have, the apps that they need for traveling, so they can get their tickets, anything like that. But you don't need to take your phone that has everything with you. Also, if you do take your phone that has everything, your normal phone, log out of your apps, log out of Facebook, log out of social media. You can delete apps, before you travel. Something that's really important, do not use Face ID. Use a manual password system that you have to enter. And if law enforcement asks for your password, you do not have to provide them your password. So that's why we recommend not using Face ID. So, because law enforcement, they cannot demand that you give them your password. if your phone was on Face ID, they could simply grab your phone, turn it towards your face, and open it. So, in a situation like that, if you have to manually input your password, law enforcement won't be able to do that. If your device is confiscated, get the agent's name and receipt. I think something also important with this is once your device is seized, we don't know exactly what they're searching for. We don't know what they can access. So it's safe to assume that they can access anything. That's important to note. Say, we have situations where someone has a couple stops, or a couple layovers. In one layover, they were searched, something was seized. At the next stop, assume that whatever was on your device, they have access to. So your questions, your answers, and everything like that, everything that you're saying should match what they have, like what they have evidence of. So that's important to note. Because they can say you were at the next stop, they ask you a question, they see something different from in your phone from before, they'll say, oh, why are you lying to us? And all of a sudden it becomes a bigger issue. And they can use that to either try to pursue charges against you or use that to try and either get you to become an informant or possibly snitch on somebody else or something like that. So, we recommend pretty much using a burner phone, but definitely password protected. Do not give out your password. Okay, so now we're going to segue into knowing your rights as an employee.
Sorry, Adam, can I just pause for 1 second?
Yes.
One question. Can you briefly talk about citizens versus non-citizens in travel situations?
Yes. So
I am not a citizen, right? So I may be prohibited from coming in, whereas somebody who's a citizen, they need to let in. But maybe Adam can talk about that. While I'm schooling, and I want to tell one thing. I think it was early in December. Sheikh Tahir was here for the fundraiser, right? Sheikh Tahir called me saying one of our imams is at the Canadian border. He's driving in, and they're asking him to sign and complete a paper. He's a citizen, that imam, who's coming in. Like the paper asks about social media accounts and everything. So I immediately called Adam. Adam essentially said, no, the imam doesn't have to provide the information. We advise if he doesn't provide the information, he should just know that they might hold them for a little bit longer, so there might be some inconvenience, but that they cannot prevent him from coming. So that's what we told the imam. Other lawyers said the same thing. That's what he did, right? And he was able to come in. If it was maybe me and on a green card, that could have been a bit different, or somebody on a visa. But still, in that case, the imam didn't just take what they told, right? So he said, why are you asking this information? You have my passport, you have everything about me. I don't have to provide this additional information about my social media or not. Right? So he asserted his rights. But I'm going to pass to Adam briefly about this.
Yes. Thank you, Ahmed. Yes. So if you're a U.S. citizen, DHS cannot prevent you from coming back into the United States. You're allowed, if you're a U.S. citizen, you're allowed to come back into the United States. They can make life difficult. They can detain you. They can question you. We know people who've been detained for up to 12 hours with, nothing. Them just asking questions or them letting them sit in a room for a while, then, every couple hours asking them some questions. But if you're a U.S. citizen, they have to let you in after a reasonable detainment. Is 12 hours reasonable? Depending on the specific facts. But last times we see 8 hours. The courts will probably say, oh, 8 hours is long enough for the government to try and figure out, do their investigation. So a U.S. citizen cannot be prevented from coming into the United States. Now, with that said, we have had situations where they've told a U.S. citizen that you cannot fly back into the country. So they said, listen, like, we're not letting you fly. You're allowed to go back to the country, but you're going to have to drive in. So the person rented a car and drove, back to the United States. They're a citizen, so they're allowed in. They can limit, say, oh, we're not letting you fly in, but they cannot prevent you from legally entering the country. Now, a non-citizen, that right does not exist. When you're at an international, port of entry, law enforcement has a lot of discretion in what they can ask and what they can require of you. Some of it is, part of like the visa, part of the requirements and rules of having a visa, but other, aspects of it, just come from not being a U.S. citizen and not having that inherent right to enter the United States. So they can ask a lot of excessive questions. They do sometimes, like Ahmed said, just create these new forms. Oh, what's your social media handle? Just fill out this form and you can come in. In a situation like that, it might be easier to just fill out the form and come in. They may let the brother in right away if he signs the form. But it's important to exercise your rights. Now, with that said, I also want to throw it out there. In all these situations, each individual has to make, the choice that works for them. But, it's always the best practice to assert your rights. Always. So yes. I don't know, Ahmed, do you have any like follow-up questions regarding
No,
that?
no, you'll get questions, but for example, I want to bring, right? So there's a new executive order about international students who participated in protests. It defines that as like, people who have been violent in protests. But like most people like, are not. Could that come up like for an international student while flying back into the United States? Right now, it is within the realm of possibilities that a CBP officer can ask. I came to the United States as an international student. I was in that status for 8 years, right?
Yeah.
So in that situation, there is a lot of discretion for the CBP officer. And we are in a little bit of an unknown situation right now. That's why immigration attorneys are often encouraging people to not travel if there is like, some risk or there is something that is a little bit tricky with your situation, unless you have to. But of course, like, that's, as Adam said, is a very sort of like in each case is very specific, right? So like in my case, and like, I've talked about this publicly, right? So I'm on a green card. I participated in a Palestine protest in the capital in Washington, D.C. I was arrested, was like nothing criminal as such. Together with me, 60, 70 other like, executive directors of CAIR and other organizations. So when before I travel, I have to travel, right? Inshallah, I have the intention to go to Turkey this summer. I will check with an immigration attorney. This is the situation. What's the best practice that I should do? Should I travel? Should I not travel? So all of that needs to be part of our calculation right now. But Adam, back to you. And of course, I'm sure there's questions about these things. Adam will try to answer those, inshallah, when we get to questions. But Adam, yeah, over to you back.
All right. Yes. And thank you for that, Ahmed. It seems like as of right now that, Customs and Border Protection could ask questions about protest activities, right? With Trump's executive order, this is something that, is definitely going to be challenged, to see if this is constitutional or not. We're asserting that the executive order is not constitutional, but it will take time for the courts to make that determination, right? So I think it goes back to Ahmed's point about traveling. If traveling is, if you have to travel right now, then you have to travel, right? But if you don't have to, if it's not an emergency, the recommendation across the board is to not, because we don't know how everything's going to play out. And we saw last time, 60 some thousand people were up in the sky when Trump, said no Muslims are entering. And then nobody knew what to do and things like that. So, there's nothing that would prevent Trump from necessarily doing that. Maybe not the same thing exactly, but something like that. And it'll take time for the community to, respond. It'll take time to figure out where the law actually lies. And if you're out of the country and you're not a citizen, it could put you in jeopardy or at least delay any type of return. So again, with that though, if you do need to travel, contact an immigration attorney. And with all of this, if you have immigration concerns, contact an immigration attorney. It's a very complex area of law, a very specialized area of law. And at CAIR-Philadelphia, we deal with civil rights and discrimination issues. We can provide some general advice on immigration issues, but it's better for us to partner, with experts in the field. So if you do need recommendations or for immigration attorneys, reach out to us and we can point you in the right direction. But before any travel, it's worth, talking with an attorney for a half an hour to see what risks, you could face. So segueing into knowing your rights as an employee, I talked about the Civil Rights Act earlier. It requires fairness in hiring, firing, training, and promotion. It also, permits you to be, or it forbids you from working, it gives you a right to work in a non-hostile work environment. So you have a right to be at work without facing discrimination from your coworkers. You also have the right to report and seek compensation for discriminatory action without retaliation. So if you are discriminated against, there are pathways where you can try to receive some type of compensation for your discrimination, and your employer cannot retaliate against you or fire you because you're saying you were discriminated against. And you're also required to receive reasonable accommodations for religious practices and observances. So your employer is required under law. Most employers are required under law to provide reasonable accommodations. So we'll touch on that a little bit. Receiving reasonable accommodations. An employer is required to provide an accommodation as long as it does not create an undue hardship on the employer. So a reasonable accommodation. An example of a reasonable accommodation is, I want to ask my employer if I can take 15 minutes every day to pray Dua. I go to my employer and I say, as a Muslim, I'm required to pray 5 times a day. This prayer occurs when I'm in the office. I'd like, if I can close my office for 15 minutes to pray. Your employer is required to grant you reasonable accommodations unless it creates an undue hardship on the employer's part. So a situation like this, closing the door for 15 minutes, that should not create an undue burden on the employer. So they should, be granting that accommodation. Now, say every Friday, I want to leave to go to Jummah. I'll take my lunch break, I have an hour break. I'll use that hour to go to Jummah. Generally, that's an accommodation that a lot of employers can make. Now, if somebody asked, oh, I need 5 hours off every Friday for Jummah, that's a situation where an employer could potentially say, this, having you off 5 hours every week creates undue hardship for us. We have to bring in somebody else to cover you. If it's just 1 hour, it's no problem. But for 5 hours, it creates, a problem. The employer doesn't have to grant that. So it is a collaborative process between the employer and the employee. So with that, that's something at CAIR that we can assist with. We have sample letters that you can submit to your employer requesting accommodations. And it's also something that sometimes, we can get on the phone with an employer, and try to, find what's reasonable. Sometimes an employer say like, listen, we can't let everybody, pray at the same time, but people can pray at different times, or, something like that, depending on the specific facts of the environment that you're in and how the job works. But just overall, though, the employer has to make some type of accommodations. So let's say in the healthcare field, right? There's lots of times strict uniform codes regarding, like how your hair has to be covered, whether a hair net or things like that. And it probably says like no other head coverings can be worn. But lots of times Muslim women can have an accommodation to wear hijab. It doesn't fit the uniform, but in 99.99% of situations, wearing a hijab does not impact or cause a burden for the employer. A situation, on the other hand, where someone requesting to wear hijab has caused a burden and the courts have determined it caused a burden is for law enforcement. Just in Philadelphia specifically too, like around 20 years ago, someone, Muslima hijabi, sued because she wasn't allowed to become a police officer because she wasn't given an accommodation to wear the hijab. The courts determined that for safety concerns and things like that, the police could prevent that. Now things have started to change, and even though the law said, 20 years ago that the police didn't have to provide the accommodation, now this year we see that the Philadelphia Police Department, they are starting to permit, the police cadets to wear hijab. So, those are situations that kind of show when a reasonable accommodation is reasonable and sometimes when it's not reasonable. So if you are experiencing a hostile work environment or other discrimination, hostile work environment, say, every day you go in, somebody, say your name's not Muhammad, but they know you're Muslim, and every day, oh, hey, Muhammad. Oh, hey, Muhammad. They think it's a joke or something, but they're saying it every day. That's discriminatory. You don't have to deal with that type of, constant harassment based off of your religion at work. So your employer themselves cannot be discriminating against you. Like your boss can't be saying discriminatory comments, but they also can't just kind of, turn a blind eye and let other employees discriminate. If they know that there's discrimination going on or you report it and they don't do anything, your employer can be in trouble because they have a duty to make sure that you're not in a hostile work environment. If you are in that situation, remain calm, document the discrimination. That's very important. Document everything. Emails are always better than in-person conversations because we have a record of it. Now, if your employer is being smart, they're not going to put anything that's going to get them in trouble in writing, but sometimes they do. So, document the discrimination and know that I used to be on the employer side of this, right? And there's situations where employers, it seems like they are discriminating, but they will try to implement other measures to make it look like that they're going to terminate you for a real reason. So lots of times people who are facing discrimination, then all of a sudden their supervisor starts criticizing everything that they submit. Even they never got any complaints before. They submit everything the same, but now their supervisor is, very hypercritical of everything. Or, the supervisor like keeps, hounding them or things like that, or they put them on a performance improvement plan. If you start to see these things happening and you feel like your employer is turning against you, contact CAIR. We can help you navigate through that process. And lots of times, if you file a complaint, like you start to see your employers acting funny, or you think you're being discriminated against. And I know in the Muslim community, lots of times there are a lot of interactions where it's like, are they discriminating against me? Are they just not informed, or are they completely like oblivious that I'm even offended by what's going on? Um, you know, sorry, lost my train of thought there. Um, Sorry, brother Ahmed.
No, yeah, no, this is super helpful, Adam. I'll like, give one example, but in the meantime, if we can move to like the ICE
Yes.
conversation because of time.
Yeah.
And then like, what masjids should do, what should be like, followed in the masjid environment. As Adam is bringing that content up, because he's going to show examples of like what an ICE warrant looks like and what a judicial warrant looks like, for example. But I want to give us one example. We had a Palestinian community member who was at her work. She was doing her job, but the employer was asking like, unrelated questions. And then like, she was also doxxed. And they were like, oh, is this you? And all of that. And she contacted us. And like, based on Adam's advice, like we were able to actually not only intervene, but also like she was ready to leave that job, but then we were able to achieve that without them terminating her and us being able to get a settlement, at least for her, for the trouble that she went through, because it was becoming an unacceptable environment, right? And I know that, doxing is a major issue. So we have, I know, like folks here who are doxed as well, right, because of their activism. And we have specific programs for those situations as well. But yeah, Adam, I think in terms of maybe specifically moving to the ICE conversation and the masjid one, that will be good, inshallah, at this point, so that we can leave enough room for questions as well.
Okay. Oh, thank you, inshallah. So here, I was sorry, just 1 second, trying to hop in there. So I'm gonna kind of jump around a little bit because I do want to touch, yes, on the ICE stuff. So generally, if the police or ICE ask about your immigration status, you have the right to remain silent, and you do not have to discuss your immigration or citizenship status with police, immigration agents, or any other officials. You do not have to answer questions about where you were born, whether you're a U.S. citizen, or how you entered the country. Now, if you are entering the international border, you do have to answer those questions. But if you're just stopped on the street by local law enforcement, the FBI, federal law enforcement, or ICE, you don't have to answer those questions. If you're not a U.S. citizen and an immigration agent requests your immigration papers, you have to present them. If you're over 18, carry your immigration documents with you at all times. If you do not have immigration papers and you're confronted, say you want to remain silent. And importantly, do not lie about your citizenship status or provide fake documents. So if you have a green card, carry it with you. If you are a U.S. citizen, and you want to get a U.S. passport card, you can get that. So it's like a driver's license, but it's just in a card. You can put it in your wallet. You don't have to carry the book around with you everywhere. If you are stopped and they see that, there's no question as to whether you are a U.S. citizen. That's an extra layer of precaution you can take. Now, on the other hand, if you do not have status, overstayed status, or were never inspected upon entry or anything like that, and you have a foreign passport, do not keep that on you. because there is opportunities that if they don't know where you're from after a certain amount of time, they do have to let you go. If they have your passport, your foreign passport, they'll know exactly where you're from and could possibly deport you right away. Do not lie about citizenship status or provide fake documents, including providing fake social security numbers or anything like that. Those are crimes with serious, criminal ramifications and immigration ramifications. So that's important. When ICE is at your door, keep the door closed. Ask if they're immigration agents or if they are from ICE. Ask them what they're there for. Just by opening the door does not give ICE a right to enter your house, but it's safer always to speak with law enforcement through the door. If the agents don't speak your language, ask for an interpreter. You have that right. But if ICE is at your door, do not open the door. Make sure you contact your attorney, and you can tell the ICE person to leave their number and that your attorney will contact them. But they do not have the right to enter your house. If you're out on the street, ICE, and you're in public places, ICE has more rights and they can stop you and they can question you. If they have a warrant of removal, they can grab you if you're out eating somewhere. They can't grab you from your house. They cannot go into your house unless you let them into your house. So if they ask to come in, the answer is always no. If they want to, speak with you or they need you to review documents or anything like that, my attorney will contact you, and then, contact an immigration attorney, and then you go from there. If ICE shows up at your house, ask for a warrant. And if they present a warrant, make sure that it is signed by a judge. And an ICE warrant on its own does not give ICE permission to enter your house. In order for them to enter your house, they need a warrant that is signed by a judge. If they have it, have them slip it underneath the door. If they don't have it, say, sorry, can't talk. My attorney will call you. That's it. So here is a sample. This is a sample of a warrant from the district court, which is the federal judge, the federal court of wherever you are. This is a search warrant that if ICE comes to your house with this and it's signed by a judge, they have the right to enter your house. They will tell you, we have a warrant, we're coming in. They're not going to ask you for permission. If they have this, they have permission to enter. They don't need your permission. Now, if you ever receive a warrant, make sure the name is correct, make sure the address is correct, and any details. If it's incorrect, say, this is incorrect. They may still try to enter. That's something that we can challenge afterwards. But make sure all the information is correct. And really, down here at the bottom, it must have the signature. That's very important. Without the signature, it's an invalid warrant, and you don't have to let them in. This, on the other hand, is an ICE warrant. This is a warrant of removal or deportation. This does not give ICE the right to enter your house. Okay. They cannot enter your house. They can arrest you in a public place if they have this warrant, but it's not a search warrant. And if they show up at your house saying, oh, we have a warrant, they slide it underneath, you look at it, and it's like, oh, this seems official. Maybe it says warrant of removal. But if you look at who signed it, it's signed by an immigration official. It's not signed by a judge, and they know this, but they also know that most people don't know what their rights are. And so, a paper like this, they're like, oh, this is a warrant. I have to let them in. No. So if you see this, do not let them in. This is at your home and likewise at the masjid. So that's very important. Do not open the door, communicate through the door, remain silent, don't sign anything, do not consent to a warrantless search. And I do want to try to bring up, sorry, Ahmed, I'm trying to pull up the guidance that sent out.
So as Adam is pulling it up, much of that will also apply to the masjid, right? So with this new executive order, like schools, for example, whether that's Islamic schools or public schools, are also potentially open for ICE to show up. Now, schools also have developed like protocols around like calling the school's attorney if like something like it happens. On masajid too, right? So like the advice and like we're all talking about masajid. One, there needs to be a person who is authorized by the masjid to talk to any law enforcement. It can't just be you or me. I'm a part of the Jama'ah over here, whatever, but I don't take the authority. The masjid needs to have somebody tasked with that, and I'm sure like your administration is working on, right? Ideally, that person should be known by the community. So not just by the board, but everybody should be like, if some, like we see anyone, anybody comes, whether it's police or us, right? It needs to be known that that's brother XYZ, sister XYZ, who is going to be the point person, and ideally that is posted so people know. And ideally, right, so there is a sign that says, you know, events here and programs are like private events, even though the masjid is open to all. So that, you know, and there are certain areas of the masjid that is specifically marked as private. Whether that's Imam Sheikh Shafali's room, whether that's the secretary room, the board room. So that, you know, there's somebody, right? So without the warrant specifying that room, they cannot handle that, even if they could potentially hypothetically do that. Now we're talking about hypotheticals. Maybe this will never happen. Allah, right? So they cannot tomorrow target a Latino church in New York. Right, and I'm like, you know, we need, this is just like, you know, preparation. But I'll pass it to Adam now, but much of what's said over that, right? So if individuals that approach, do not talk, do not give information. Again, it doesn't mean that you are hiding something. You are just asserting your constitutional rights. Because like we've seen this, like an FBI shows up to a community member and says, I want to talk to you. And they know they've been through one of our trainings. They say, give me your card. I'll contact you with my attorney. And then they try to play dirty. Do you have something to hide? I just want to have a conversation. No, I don't have nothing to hide, but this is my constitutional right. I asked these to a Congress member who used to be an FBI agent. I told them, this is the advice we give to our community. He said, yeah, that's solid advice. I said, will you come to the masjid and say this to the community? He was a little bit like, yeah. But in any case, right, so this is like across the board. It's not just CAIR, like, you know, wherever you go to, this is the advice that you are going to hear about law enforcement. But with that, I'm sending back to you, Adam.
Yes, thank you, Ahmed. So earlier I talked about, law enforcement needs a search warrant to come into your home. With public spaces, they don't need a search warrant generally with public spaces, but any private spaces in public places, any private rooms or anything like that, at a minimum, law enforcement needs a search warrant. So like Ahmed said, any private rooms in the masjid, any offices or anything like that, in order for law enforcement to get into those, they need, well, there's two ways law enforcement can get to private areas. One is by permission from the owner. So if the masjid lets them back there, they can, or by a warrant signed by a judge, specifically mentioning that specific space. Those are the only two ways that law enforcement can get into private areas. So with that, there used to be a policy where ICE would not make arrests near sensitive locations. Here, you see the sensitive locations are schools, places of worship, such as mosques, churches, synagogues, hospitals, the sites of weddings, funerals, or other public religious ceremonies, or marches, rallies, and parades. So they rescinded that memo. With that, it seems that now that there's a possibility that ICE agents will show up to these sensitive locations. They will wait around schools, mosques, churches, hospitals, to conduct, law enforcement activities, even if there are no national security or safety concerns. Can ICE enter the masjid to arrest someone? ICE needs consent or a judicial warrant to enter and search any private areas of the masjid. Private areas are areas that are not accessible on a regular basis to the general public or the larger congregation, such as the imam's office. ICE does not need consent or judicial warrant to enter the public spaces in the masjid or to loiter outside the perimeter of the masjid. So based off of the executive order, that's where the law stands. It still will be challenged. It's our advice to assert that the masjid itself is private space, right? Individuals are allowed to come to pray. It's not open for individuals to come for other purposes. It's not a tourist attraction, not, something like that. So our advice is to maintain that it is a private space, and to, if ICE tries to come in, to tell them, no, you're not allowed to enter. If they try to enter, you will likely need to let them enter, right? That's something with dealing with law enforcement, never physically prevent law enforcement from entering. If they're entering illegally, it's always something that we can challenge afterwards. But with this, it's important that, like Ahmed was saying, like having a contact person, the names known, and everyone in the masjid should know what to do if they see law enforcement, if they see ICE agents. If you see someone, or if you see suspicious activity, not just related to ICE, but just in general, having these types of plans in place are important. It's like, oh, these two cars have been parked there all day. These people, they keep looking over here, not sure, they haven't moved, report that to somebody. Have some protocols. I think it's important to once you decide what works for your community, to make sure that the community knows, make an announcement at Juma prayer, make an announcement, during Ramadan and Tarawih prayers and things like that, that if you see anything, if you see law enforcement, you're supposed to contact this brother. And make sure that the individual who is interacting with law enforcement is an individual who is a U.S. citizen, and an individual who, could potentially, face or risk being arrested. We're not talking about long-term arrest, being arrested, but if ICE tries to come in, there's always a possibility that law enforcement says, oh, someone, is assaulted law enforcement, or is, preventing law enforcement from conducting their activities, and, will try to arrest them. So, have an individual who the stakes will not be so high for them. They have a clean record, a little summary offense or something like that wouldn't, be a problem. But whatever it is, just make sure that everybody knows. And then that individual they designate, that they know as soon as ICE comes or law enforcement comes, that they are calling their attorney, whether it's CAIR, whether it's a different attorney. I think so. For your masjid, we can work with you to try to have a designated attorney on call, if a situation like this does arise. Timothy and I, we are not licensed in Delaware. Delaware does not do reciprocity like the other states do. So we are not licensed in Delaware, which with immigration context, an immigration attorney from Pennsylvania should be able to handle that case. But if it's local law enforcement, we would need to get a Delaware attorney for you to call. But if law enforcement shows up, someone's interacting with the agents and someone is contacting the attorney. So, you can even put the attorney on the phone with ICE. the attorney can say, listen, you know, you're not allowed to enter unless you have a judicial warrant. So these are steps, you know, that are important to take. There's not one, you know, set way that you have to go about it, but whatever it is, it's coming up with a plan, making sure that there is like one designated contact person. Everybody knows the contact person, and then that everybody is told to be on the lookout for what's going on. Now, with this, it's always, you know, it's when law enforcement approaches you, like I grew up in the United States, born here, raised here, but any interaction with law enforcement, like my heart still like drops to my stomach. My heart sinks. You don't know what you're expecting. You know, so sometimes you're like, it'll just be easier to answer the questions. And sometimes it might be easier to do that, but it's really important to assert your rights because it impacts other individuals as well. And especially in a situation like this, Muslims, we have to try to stick together. So if we each assert our rights collectively, it'll be harder to target certain individuals in our community.
Yep.
If some individuals are talking and sharing information, law enforcement can, you know, target specific individuals and get whatever information they want to get. So with that said, something else that's really important with your communications, right? Don't text anybody anything regarding somebody's immigration status. You know, even if it's an issue that's going on in the community, like, oh, I feel so bad, or like, we don't know what to do for so-and-so because of XYZ, you know, maybe sometime law enforcement gets access to that individual's phone and all of a sudden somebody's on their radar that wasn't on their radar before. Which also highlights why never interact with law enforcement unless you have an attorney with you. So like information like that can't get out, but it's something to really try to be focused on right now is not communicating about specific situations. It's not gossiping, you know, not saying that people are gossiping about other people. It's coming from a genuine place of concern, but having anything in writing could, you know, hurt somebody. Sorry.
Yeah, let's switch to questions briefly because it's getting late and we want to make sure that everybody can get home on time. I'm going to circulate the phone, you know, on the brother side and the sister side for any questions. Let's get to questions. How much time, like, you know, if we wrap up in 15 minutes, the Q&A session, is it okay? Yeah. All right. So we have about 15 minutes for that. So yeah. Floor is open for questions.
So, why do we have in Delaware? So, that is all the United States. Each individual has a problem, state of Delaware, in America, they have them. It's very important.
Yeah. We are working on, inshallah, again,
last 15 years before, and they still say they're working on after 15 years, still problems. A lot of people got it here, innocent people, minor, you know, misdemeanor. And those families are not only financially disturbing, they are very helping.
So I think that we are able to help many families with, like, you know, issues that border on like both advocacy and legal work. And in cases we were able to also onboard Delaware-based attorneys to work on cases. For example, you know, the case with our brother who was arrested at UD, right? So we have essentially both hired and local one. With the immigration work, we are trying to develop that capacity and also broadly also to bring on board another attorney that's licensed in Delaware. So like if that work is ongoing, but in the meantime, like we are very active working in Delaware communities with legal issues. But you're right, that's one of our internal goals at CAIR-Philadelphia to onboard an attorney that is licensed in Delaware. Right? So like, but honestly, like if the organization is now 20 years old, I've been with CAIR-Philadelphia for 8 years. We have essentially like, you know, started from one attorney and just was able to go to 2 attorney situations. So we're inshallah trying to fundraise and like make sure that that happens. But if in the meantime, right, so any issue, Like, we are able to connect you with like, other attorneys and like on board, sometimes like, just pay an attorney so that the case can be resolved. But we can talk about specific cases as well. So one kind of. Right, so
So I want to ask about the private group question, situation. What's the minimum you will need to be able to say this is a private area if, they're saying the whole area is public, so you've got somebody in a private group.
Adam, did you get the question?
No, sorry, can you repeat it? Some of it I couldn't pick up.
The minimum like requirement for a place to count as a private area, is that the question, right? So like, let's say the masjid environment.
So in the minimum requirement, something that's locked, right? If they can't access it, without some type of additional measure. So like, a locked room, right? Now, if a room is not locked, I think that becomes a gray area, or if people are normally allowed in that space, that could be a gray area, but if something's locked, they can't make you unlock something unless they have a warrant to do so. So I think that's always, the baseline. If something's locked, that means that it's private. So even say like you're pulled over in your car, if you have a safe in your car, and they see it, they can't access that safe unless they get a search warrant because they can't force you to open it. So that's the minimum.
Putting a sign, like at the entrance of masjid saying, this is a private establishment, like in private, area for prayer purposes only, something like, to that effect. And like, we have been trying to develop like specific language and like even some signage, message Canada, but also like lawyers are like debating on what that should exactly look like, as well. That's why we currently still like are developing that.
Yes, and I think a lot of people, they come up with ideas like, oh, if I just put this, then that means that law enforcement can't come in. And the lawyers haven't necessarily been willing to jump on that right away, because we want to make sure that everything is consistent with the law. And we don't want to like falsely provide an assurance that, oh, this is a private place and ICE won't come in there, by posting this, when maybe when ICE comes up, they're not even going to look at that. So we're trying to figure out, what the exact way to do that. But with that, at least anything that's private, anything that's locked, any areas that are not open that you can't just walk into, they need a search warrant for that.
Thank you. All right, that's good. We may have lost project a little bit further, and then I'll also convey.
You said that everyone, the one with green card holders have to carry their green card all the time. And what are the risks for this to be happening for children? You see this to bring their green card everywhere as well.
Thank you. Like this was asked, like, by law, if you are a green card holder, you are required to carry it with you. Right? So I'm on a green card and it's on my wallet at all times. So I think at this time, adults should carry their green cards with them. Children, this was asked yesterday too at another setting where we had an immigration attorney too. No, the answer was no as it regards children, because it's also like, sensitive information. You don't want it to be lost or for it to be a burden on like, young children. But of course, like, when it comes to children already, there are also some restrictions as well. I think, Adam, anything to add on that?
Yeah, so children they don't have to take any, citizenship or documentation, with them to school. Under the law, before, like, states tried to pass laws where they didn't educate, non-citizens or undocumented children or something like that. And the Supreme Court said, no, the laws require you to educate children. So I know each state, they have compulsory attendance laws. So, these students are required to go to law, whether they have, or required by law to go to school, whether they're citizens or not citizens. So they're supposed to go to school. Their citizenship doesn't matter about, for their, ability to go to school. So don't carry that with you. I think, though, this does bring up a concern that I think if you do have quite like concerns about how ICE will interact with your school and stuff like that, those are conversations that we can help facilitate with your school, find out what their policy is, what law enforcement they interact with, how do they notify parents if law enforcement's there, things like that. I think approaching the schools, if you have those concerns, that's something that we can help parents navigate, because it is something. You're letting your kid go to school, right? They're out of your control while they're at school. You're trusting the school to protect them. So it is important to make sure that they have policies in place, that they're listening to the law, and that law enforcement can't just come in whenever and grab a student. So we can help you have those conversations, inshallah.
We have one more question over here. I know there's a question over here. Let's get this side first, and then.
Clarification, because I read that you shouldn't carry like your actual green card with you, but a photocopy, because ICE can take your green card and rip it up if they wanted to, because it's happened before in the past.
So the answer from the immigration attorney is that by law, you are required to carry the actual documents, not the photocopy, so have it on you. So is the answer that I got, and there's no more. If the question, the follow-up question is about the work permits, right? So this depends whether the person with the work permit, right? So a social security card, for example, is a citizen, a green card holder, or like somebody who's in an asylum process, right? So the answer to that is that, if you're on an asylum process, you can have it with you, but you don't need to be worried right now about your SSM being canceled or as such. That was the answer that was provided by immigration attorneys. And what you essentially can do is have it on you. Essentially, the answer is that if you have an ongoing process in terms of immigration, then there isn't an immediate danger. But that, if you are deciding to travel, then you need to still talk to an immigration attorney. Does it make sense? Adam, is that?
Yes, that's what Brother Ijaz, I know too, was saying. Yes.
This brother, I did this for my design, so project a little bit, and then I'll convey the thoughts. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. So if all of a sudden, any ICE or police officer finds any student on the street, so even if the student is legal, he has all the documentation, and if the officer asks to show that.
So the question is, if a police officer or an ICE officer approaches an international student out on the street and asks them about their citizenship status or any ID like show identification, what should they do?
So if they're approached by law enforcement asking their citizenship status,
or show, just asking, show us ID. I think there are two different scenarios, right?
yeah. So a question about your citizenship status, right to remain silent. You don't have to answer that question. Identification, that's more of a gray area, and ultimately law enforcement can identify you. If you have your ID on you and you just show it to them, that's that. If you don't have your ID on you, they can theoretically, and in some situations, take you to the police station saying you're not under arrest. We just need to confirm your identification. And they can detain individuals temporarily to to ID them. So generally, if law enforcement asks to see an ID, you are to present it. Now, if they're asking about citizenship status and different things, that's different. You know, like a student ID, lots of times can, you know, suffice, you know, in the moment for law enforcement, right? If they're trying to actually identify a specific individual. So if you're encountering law enforcement and they ask for an identification, you have to most likely present some type of identification.
But let's think about this, right? So some states give driver's license to everyone, regardless of status. You've shown your driver's license, but they're coming up with, are you a citizen? Right, so you've shown your driver's license, and that's fine, you've complied with the request, but when they're asking, are you a citizen? Then you essentially can say, I'm not required to answer this question.
No, in the state of Delaware law, when you make an ID, even state ID will grab the son. Have to tell them your immigration status. That's a law in Delaware.
In Delaware.
Delaware. They cannot issue you ID for driving license. Your status inside the ID. Your ID.
It's already.
Inside the.
Yeah, so like I said, in different states there are different things, so like that's why for some of these too, like, you know, looking at details like locally is helpful. But in general, right, if it is written, then it's already written, and they're just like, you know, going to see. But if somebody is saying, let's say that you just showed your student ID as an ID, and they are saying, I'm here to ask about your citizenship status, then I think what Adam is saying is, to them, you don't need to provide an answer on the ground.
Yeah, and that the license, the double license, you have like immigration status. Yeah. They don't show, but they give you one, you show them the visa, there's no job, it doesn't know they are consistent. They said it like there, I was reading.
So there might be some backend data, and that the critical point is which states have like which data sharing with immigration authorities or cities. We even have some cities that become what we call welcoming cities, meaning they will not share information with federal agencies, or they will initially not collect that information, such that they don't need to do that. We just asked this, for example, Allentown City is becoming a welcoming city, but it's a long discussion. I think there was one more question over here. There's, I think these two questions, and then we may wrap up. There are no questions on that.
Thank you. The Fourth Amendment, right, the police, they have no rights of ID without.
So, and I don't know if you were able to hear, but essentially what the brother is saying is there needs to be probable cause based on Fourth and Fifth Amendment. So if ICE is just stopping you, like what do you need to do? Do we like challenge their probable cause, or do we need to like, you know, provide information? I think like in terms of the warrants and as such, we've clarified that, but on the streets they are stopping. You're on mute, Adam.
Yeah, sorry. That's a good question. So if ICE has a warrant for removal or a warrant for deportation, you know, they can grab someone on the street. They don't have the authority to go into someone's house to get them, but they can wait till the person, you know, leaves their house and is about to get into their car to drive to work. They can there. Now, just generally, without a warrant for removal or deportation, like ICE is just investigating or looking around on the street, they can ask questions. That's why we always say, just remain silent. With immigration officials do have more authority in, like, you have to respond to them. But so in order for them to arrest you, like in public, there has to be some type of still probable cause, though, right? In general, to be detained by law enforcement. So, unfortunately, in some contexts, if they show up to a work site and individuals don't have any identification, they'll say, oh, that's probable cause that they are not, documented. So ICE, there is more leeway with ICE to like interact with someone on the street. But that's why it's also important. Like if ICE does try to interact with you, just to remain silent. I'll have my attorney call you. As soon as you start to engage with them, it can escalate pretty quickly, and they have less, like, once you're in public, they have less rules than like actual law enforcement have in actually, questioning you and detaining you.
And we know that they even arrest other citizens, right? So that happens. So like if somebody was a veteran, so. Okay, next question.
Let me, I'm not well informed on what's going on. So the only thing I found out is this had been scripted ahead of time, and the strategy was to go at double speed and to counter what the constitutional framework, or the legal framework. And so the idea, so the unconstitutional nature and all the different parties of involved. That's a time consuming task, like you were pointing out, whether someone has decided whether it's unconstitutional or not. But they are acting on this script. The drivers has the muzzle speed. Yeah. And the thing is, which we are not aware of, is what is the script. But when you go to the target, I'm targeting anybody that I don't what is the scope of this? I think for the are they coming? They know in advance what or they're not even talking. I don't understand how it's gonna work.
Thank you for that. So like the question is like, how are they doing this partially, and what is the background favor? Immigration attorneys are saying essentially that, look, getting somebody who is well documented is actually a lot of paperwork for what so they shouldn't be doing that, but they are unfortunately doing indiscriminate targeting as well. So there are cases where like an American citizen has been processed and all. But what happens if you are somehow picked up and you are sent to one of the centers, right? The immigration attorneys are saying, memorize your immigration attorney's number, especially like if you are in a situation like me and such, right? You need to have that remembered because I believe that you have like a phone call, right? Right, so you don't want to waste it. And of course, like if you're contacting your attorney, you may not be able to just say, give me my phone so I can look up the number. So your family needs to be aware of like the stuff and such. So I think actually this is the best advice we are giving, especially if you are like a non-citizen and there is something like around your status. We don't want to scare our community, but then there are realities on the ground.
I know that the pleas, I heard pleas are taken for a base. There was some in the news. So I'm just saying, if there's something beyond, like, patriot act, whatever else, it's mostly that people are just bypassing.
So currently, no, and like some of this can be challenged, but then there's usually a 10-day period for even expedited deportations. The attorneys are trying to interject even in that process, and it is possible, while it is difficult, is what they are saying. Second, like currently no framework like that, but then we are also expecting something that is closer to the Muslim ban, for example, to come, and there is already word to counter that. So all of that is going on. It's a very fluid situation. We are also like addressing, maybe wanting to just like like a protest in me cannot but mention it. We give this advice to people who are going to protest. Again, you are never to push back, like shoulder or whatever the law enforcement. But you're allowed to film them, right? So as they are doing their duties. In that process, the best advice is focus your camera on like the actions of the law enforcement agents, not the actions of like your people or your community member if they are being detained, arrested, and as such. And like try to just like make sure that that is the focus, so that it can sometimes be good evidence to use in legal proceedings. Let's hope, inshallah, that it doesn't come to that. But that's like, when we go to protest like for Palestine and such as the advice that we provide to like people who are doing the observing. But I think like with that, we are at the end of our time, and I see Brother Mustafa and Brother Zia looking at me. So Jazakumullah khair to this side, Jazakumullah khair to all of you for staying through this. And again, maybe like how do you contact us? You have my cards, my cell phone is there. pa.cair.com/report. pa.cair.com/report is our legal intake system, whether it is immigration, other things. Do put it over there. If it's immigration, we are not able to do that. We are going to connect you to somebody, inshallah, as soon as we can. Allah bless you all. Once again, if you're able to make it to our banquet on the 22nd, we'll be honored to see you. But with that, I'm going to pass it to Brother Zia and Jazakumullah khair to all of you. Adam, thank you so much. I know this is difficult to answer, but Allah bless you for joining in remotely. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Jazakallah khairan.
Jazakallah khairan.
Thank you again for everyone who's attended today. Brother Ahmed and Brother Adam came and brought a lot of good information. If anyone has any questions, please see me afterwards, or he passed along his card, but very important information, and hopefully everyone benefited from this. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Good night, inshallah.
Salam.